Hello and welcome to a new motorcycle video. I should explain before we go any further there isn't actually any motorcycling in this video. So it's the first video that is about motorcycling that contains no motorcycling, and I should explain that in more detail by saying last Sunday, which would have been the 17th of July 2022, I set off from Goulburn to ride to Albury, which is about 3.5 hours away on the Victorian New South Wales border on the Murray River. And I set off there on my Kawasaki Vulcan Voyager 1700, just like the one you can see in the picture here, with the intention of handing that bike over to my son, who had bought it from me. We'll get to the details of that a little later. But before I went, I put on all my usual protective gear, my helmet, my gloves, my jacket, my pants and so on. I plugged my GPS into the power cord, attached it to the windscreen. I plugged my FM Bluetooth transmitter into the 12-volt socket on the right hand side dashboard so that I could play my tunes through the bike's audio system, and I attached my camera to the windscreen and pressed power on and record, or so I thought. When I went to process the film the next day, they had about 3 seconds of me putting my gloves on. So as I'm the world's worst cameraman, and I've admitted to that many times before, that's no surprise, and it's lucky we were not shooting Easy Rider or something. Fortunately, you're not being required to put up with 3 hours of me riding down the Hume Highway and talking, but instead what I'm going to do is talk about other things to do with motorcycling, and in more detail explain why it is that I was handing over this bike. Now, this is the Kawasaki Vulcan Voyager 1700, as the picture says. I have owned this one since 2011 when I bought it new, and for the time that I bought it, for a couple of years I rode it back and forth to work and clocked up about 70,000 kilometres on it. And then since I've retired, I've put about another 20,000 or close to 30,000, it's nearly up to 100,000 kilometres on it. And I was getting to the stage where I was thinking, this is a big heavy bike. It's always been big and heavy, it hasn't got any bigger or heavier, it's just that I'm getting older. It's a big heavier bike, and maybe I should be looking at something a little smaller or lighter, or a combination thereof. And as it happened, my son Benjamin, who lives in Melbourne, was involved in a motorcycle accident, and so the decisions about what to do with the bike came around. So my son Benjamin, who had this model motorcycle, the 2006 Kawasaki Vulcan 1600, you can see the two bikes are very similar in style and design. The major differences being mine is a 1700 and mine is a belt drive, not a shaft drive. Mine is a 6-speed gearbox, his is a 5-speed. Mine is the sort of more luxury touring model, which was great for rider and pillion, and his is a little bit more stripped down. Anyhow, he was riding through Melbourne one day going about his business, and somebody in the lane beside him, without looking, changed lanes and clipped him and knocked him off his bike. Now, fortunately, he was not injured, but the bike was, of course, damaged. And at first, excuse me, at first the insurance company decided to deny liability. Oh, sorry, that's not correct. At first, the registered owners of the vehicle that caused the accident decided to try and deny liability by saying it wasn't their fault, or the driver was not acting on their instructions, or something strange like that. And then when that didn't seem like a viable argument, the insurance company, of course, got involved, and they had to then make some assessments about what was the bike worth, what would it cost to repair it, get some quotes and so on. And after a bit of to and fro, they decided that they would write the bike off. One of the problems was, you can see with this bike, it has what are called hard cases or panniers on the back, and since this is a 2006 model, the Kawasaki no longer make those panniers, so they could not repair the bike to as new condition, and they decided that the cost of repairing was more than the bike was worth, so they wrote it off. They then paid him a settlement minus the salvage. He gets to keep the wreck and do whatever he wants with it, and they paid him a settlement. So when that happened, I offered to sell him my bike, the one you saw in the previous picture, for whatever the settlement was. And so we agreed on the price, and that's why I was heading off to Albury on the weekend. I didn't want to stop riding, so I had to then think about, well, what sort of bike would I get to replace the one I had, if I was to get another bike at all. And so I had a number of things in mind, and a number of things I had to consider, which were to do with, of course, budget, excuse me, style of bike, comfort, safety, and things like that. So the rest of this video is going to be me talking about what sort of bike or the decisions I made about what sort of bike I would get. So if you're interested in that, then continue to listen. Excuse me. If you're not interested, then just turn down the video and turn down the volume and just look at the pictures, I guess. I suppose I should start by saying that one of the reasons that I ride a motorcycle is because I enjoy it. Yes, it's convenient, it's a bit cheaper to buy and it's a bit cheaper to run than a car. The bigger bikes are almost as expensive in terms of registration and insurance to put on the road, and of course motorcycles pay the same fuel tax as cars. My bike had a 20-litre tank, so it wasn't going to cost the hundreds of dollars that it cost to fill up Land Cruisers and things like that, but nevertheless, I ride a motorcycle because I like riding a motorcycle. If you've ever ridden one or been on the back and you have the bug, you'll know what that feels like. You'll know the feeling that comes with riding a motorcycle. If you've been on one and it scared the living daylights out of you, or you've never been on one, then you don't know the feeling, and I probably can't convince you. Suffice to say that everyone who rides a motorcycle does it because they enjoy it, and it's only they that understand why dogs stick their head out of the window when they're in the car. And I also particularly like riding cruisers. This bike here and the two previous ones are examples of what are called cruiser motorbikes or motorcycles. They're generally based on either Harley or Indian motorcycles from the United States, but the major Japanese manufacturers, that is Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha and Kawasaki, all make cruisers of various sizes and styles, or various sizes, and they are considerably cheaper than the HarleyDavidson or Indian versions, and that's why so many of them are sold. Just for comparison's sake, the Kawasaki Voyager that I owned, which is no longer sold in Australia, I think in part because of the Vlad laws, and they probably didn't sell as many as they thought they would, but they're no longer sold in Australia. It was about $23,000 right away. I didn't pay that much because I had another bike for trade-in, so I got a good trade-in. Whereas the Harley-Davidson that it's modelled on, of about the same size, is something like $46,000 right away. Generally, the Japanese bikes are thought to be more reliable, but there are certain motorcycle groups and clubs that have, as part of their motto, no Jap crap. So anyway, I like to ride a motorcycle because I enjoy it. I also like to ride the cruiser motorcycle because I like the style and the design of them. They are very comfortable to ride for long distances, and they just appeal to me as a way of, as a kind of bike. So in thinking about what bike I was going to get next, I had to consider, as I said, what style of bike I wanted. Because my wife wanted to go on the back with me now, well, she had been on the back a few times and now had expressed a desire to go on the back again, I had to think of something that would be comfortable for her to ride. And if you look at the pillion seat on this cruiser here, they're not very wide, they're not very big, and they're not very comfortable. So I had to think of comfort. I had to think of safety, given it's a motorcycle. There's a certain degree of safety you can get. And I also had to think of things like ease of manoeuvrability for the kind of bike I wanted to get and for the age I am and all those sort of things. So I dismissed the cruisers as much as I like them, simply because I felt if I'm having someone on the back, I need something that's comfortable. I need something that gives that person a sense of safety and security. And the cruisers probably wouldn't do that. So I dismissed the cruisers almost immediately. So in order to determine the sort of bike I would get, I went through a process of elimination, and I worked my way through things that I decided I didn't want or that didn't suit my criteria, which were budget, comfort, some measure of safety and manoeuvrability for a person who's 69 going on 70. And the next on my list to be dismissed were the sports bikes. Now, I should say that all the expressions and all the things that I say here are just my personal opinion. I'm sure sports bikes are very comfortable bikes for the people who ride them, and I'm sure they enjoy them, and I know that they are manoeuvrable because they're nice and light and they have a very short wheelbase and they can fly through the twisties and zip around the curves. And so I don't mean any disrespect to the people who ride them or the bikes themselves. I'm just talking in terms of what seems to suit my purpose and my riding. And the reasons I dismissed the sports bikes, first of all, were I don't really like the look of them. They don't look very nice to me. I'm sure they're good for the purpose they're built for, but they just don't look very nice to me. And the second feature that caused me concerns is the pillion seats always look like a bit of an afterthought, and the pegs are always put fairly high up, so it looks as if the pillion passenger is first of all above the rider, which means they're going to get hit by any wind or turbulence and buffeting, and because of the angle between their thighs and their calves and their hips, it looks to me to be awfully uncomfortable. So sports bikes, great bikes for the people who ride them, great bikes for the people who to do the sorts of things that people who ride them want to do, but I just dismissed them and said, no, that's not the sort of bike for me. So the next sort of bike on my list of bikes to eliminate were the sports tourers or the road tourers or the touring bikes. They go by a whole bunch of different names, but the next three bikes that you see are examples of those. There's the Honda ST1300 here, and I have not ridden this particular bike, but I did ride the earlier model, the ST1100. They're very comfortable bikes. You can see this one's fitted out with a top box and two side cases, so there's plenty of luggage storage on them. Big powerful 1300 engines, 5 or 6 speed gearboxes, and I'm sure they do all the sorts of things that the riders of those want for them as well. And you get on those and you set off down the highway and you can ride for 3 or 4 hours or until your fuel runs out, and do so in great comfort. So as I say, there's the Honda ST1300 here. There's the Yamaha, I beg your pardon, GTR 1300, or maybe 1400. I know these are the bikes that the New South Wales Police were riding for a period of time. I'm not sure if they still have them, but they certainly had them at one period of time. So you imagine that they're fairly good, reliable bikes. But I dismissed the sports bikes for two reasons. Number one, I was getting up towards the engine capacity of the bike that I was getting rid of, that is 1700cc. So the ST1300, the GTR 1300, the next one that I'll show you is also a 1300, and I know that BMW have one that's 1600. So I dismissed them first of all because in engine size I was getting up to the size of bike that I was just getting rid of. And this is the Kawasaki GTR 1300 touring road bike. Seemed a lot to be Kawasaki's in these early pictures. I should say I got all these pictures off the internet, either from bike sales or from just images, and I don't mean to infringe anybody's copyright. I don't mean to imply that I'm selling any bikes or anything like that. These are just for entertainment and infotainment purposes. So I dismissed the road bikes because, as I said, the engine capacity was getting up to near the size of the bike that I was dismissing, it was getting rid of, and also because I thought the mass, or that is the weight of the bike, was also getting up around the same, not going to be nearly 400 kilos, which the Kawasaki Voyager is, but certainly getting up close to that sort of weight. And therefore my concerns about manoeuvring a heavy bike in slow traffic, getting in and out of the town, not out on the open road, but getting in and out of the town through the traffic lights and the roundabouts and the giveways and all that, that was one of the reasons that I thought it was time to move the 1700 on. So again, I'm sure these are all very good bikes, and they are, the people who own them and ride them get lots of pleasure out of them, but they just didn't suit the purpose that I was looking for and the kind of riding that I wanted to do. Even though with the top box, the pillion seats don't look all that comfortable. The top box gives you a sort of backrest and a bit more security for your pillion passenger, but the pillion position doesn't look all that comfortable, so that was another factor that I had to consider. So having dismissed those sorts of bikes, cruisers, sports bikes, touring bikes, I then turned my thoughts to scooters. And as some of you who have watched some of my other motorcycle videos would know, I also have a Suzuki Bergman AN 650 executive scooter, and I consider that scooter to be the benchmark of maxi scooters. Maxi scooters are the ones that I refer to as being bigger than about 200cc, and as far as I can determine, they go from about the 200cc up to the 850. I say the Bergman is the benchmark because the one I have, which is I think about a 2009 model, it is a 650 parallel twin. It has a constant variable transmission, or CVT, as they all scooters do, twist and go. It has a manual override which gives you a 6th gear, so when you're on the highway you get better fuel economy. It has an electrically adjustable screen so that if you're riding into town and it getting down to 50 and below, and it's a warm summer's day and you want a bit of airflow, you can drop the screen down. But once you get back out on the highway, you just push the button and the screen goes back up, and you're back in that bubble that protects you and keeps the wind off your chest and your shoulders and so on. It has lots of in-dash storage with 2 glove boxes and a lockable one, which also has one of those 12-volt sockets so you can plug in a charger and charge your phones and stuff like that. The mirrors fold in electrically so that if you're parking, because it's a fairly wide bike, there's no danger of the mirrors being broken off. You can fit 2 full-face helmets under the seat if you put them in according to the instructions, and with the top box you've got an extra bit of storage as well. Twin discs on the front and a single disc on the back, so I consider that to be the sort of benchmark of scooters. So I started looking around to see if there were any more of that model available, and I discovered that Suzuki had withdrawn that model from the Australian market in 2018. You can buy the Bergman 400 and the Bergman 200, but both of those seem to be inferior to the 650, and I thought from the beginning, if I'm getting a scooter, I need something about 650 if I'm going to carry 2 people on it. The Bergman carries 2 people comfortably, although the seat, I must admit, is a little hard. I've never ridden as a pillion, but I know the passenger seat is a little hard, and after about an hour and a half to 2 hours of riding, you're getting the numbness that everyone feels. So not being able to find a recent model, and very few of them available on the market at the moment, I sort of had to look at other maxi scooters and see what was available. So the next scooter that came onto my radar that I considered for a little while was the Yamaha TMax. I've labelled it here as the TMax 500. I think during its iterations it has been a 500, a 530 and now a 560. And the current 2022 model is called the TMax Tech, or something like that, and it has lots of things that open and shut and bells and whistles and so on. But again, looking at the 500 here, it's a very sporting looking scooter. Now, sporting style isn't necessarily the problem, but looking at the pillion seat, again, I thought not all that comfortable. They have pegs rather than footboards, which tends to put a bit more pressure on your joints, and it doesn't have as much in-dash storage or under-seat storage, and the screen in the models that I could see was not electrically adjustable. Yes, you could adjust it with a few tools and you sort of get off the bike and do that, but that sort of defeats the purpose. As I said, you're coming into town and it's a bit of a warm day and you want a bit of airflow, you need to drop the screen down and then put it back up when you get out. And the TMax didn't have that, so I dismissed that, although there are lots of them on the market and they seem to be all in good condition, and it seems to be the most successful of the TMax. Of the maxi scooters, I dismissed that one as well. Kymco, or Kymco, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, is a, I think, Taiwanese manufacturer, and I discovered during my research that they not only made their own scooters, they actually made the engines for the BMW scooters, which I'll show you in a moment as well. The Kymco, or Kymco 550 seemed to fit most of my requirements. It was a reasonable size engine. It didn't have an electrically adjustable screen, although it did have a few other bells and whistles. The under-seat storage was a little bit limited, but I've formed the view that they probably didn't sell very many of them. I don't see very many of the 550s coming up on bike sales or places like that. And that didn't necessarily mean there was anything wrong with the bike, but it makes you begin to think, well, when something goes wrong with my bike, where is a dealer? Who's going to have parts, and where can I get the parts from, and is it going to take some time, and so on and so forth. So much as I was kind of attracted to the Kymco, or Kymco, I dismissed it on those grounds. And that brought me to the BMW, and you can see here the BMW 650 GT. They had a 650 and a 600 Sport, and then the 600 Sport became a 650 Sport. So there were 2 models, as I say, the GT and the Sport. The difference was the GT had an electrically adjustable screen and a few other bells and whistles like heated grips and heated seats and so on. And I think I might have just said that, the electrically adjustable screen. The under-seat storage was somewhat limited. When I'm saying that, that's important because if you don't have a top box and you've got 2 people riding, you need space for 2 helmets to just, and if you want to go out for a picnic, so on, you need space under the seat to put your picnic basket or whatever. So I was attracted initially to the BMWs, thinking these look like pretty solid bikes, and BMW has a good reputation and so on. As I said, the engines when they were not made by BMW, they were made by Kymco or Kymco, and that's not necessarily good, bad, or anything. It's just a statement of fact. But the BMW scooters were only available in Australia for a couple of years, and then they ceased making them. And this, as you can see, is the BMW Sport scooter. The difference is the screen's a bit lower, the lines are a bit sleeker, so it looks a bit more sporting, but essentially it's the same bike, same engine, same transmission. And like all scooters, they all have the twist and go, or CVT gearbox, or constant variable transmission. And what that means is you just turn the throttle and the bike, by some voodoo that I don't understand, with belts and pulleys, works out what gear you need to be in and puts it in that gear, and as you close off the throttle it automatically changes down, a bit like an automatic in a car, I guess, but not quite the same thing. So in all respects it was like any other scooter, but as I say, they were only available for a couple of years, and my thinking was, well, okay, if they're only available for a few years, what happens when something goes wrong? Where's the servicing? There's no BMW dealer in Goulburn. I'd have to go to Canberra or Sydney. Parts, all those issues that I mentioned to do with the Kymco were still relevant, I think. So I dismissed the BMW scooters for the same reason. It seems at the moment that I'm dismissing lots of things, and that's the case. As I said, the process of elimination rather than immediately saying I want that particular bike. Honda, who are the biggest of all the Japanese manufacturers, and I think they probably sell the most motorcycles of any manufacturer. They've been in the business since, I think they've started making cars and bikes and things before World War II, but they've certainly been in the business since World War II, or the end of World War II. And their bikes are generally known as being reliable, well made, quality control is good, those kinds of things. So there's no particular reason to shy away from the Honda. This is the Honda Silverwing. If you're a motorcyclist, you'll be aware of the Honda Goldwing, which is the 1800 road tourer. Like, the Silverwing is not a third; it's not a half; it's a third of the size of that one, and it's the scooter. There is also a Honda Forza, which I think is a 750 scooter, and I looked at those, and again, there were some reservations. The screen was not adjustable, and that was a big feature to me. I want to be able to lower the screen to get some airflow and raise it when I want to keep the wind off myself and keep the wind off my passenger. I should say that going right back to my Voyager, that screen was fixed. It was not adjustable, but it was high enough though that in wintertime you were well protected, you were well behind the screen and in a cocoon. In summertime you might have to stick your head a bit to the side if you need a bit of an airflow, but an adjustable screen seemed like a thing that if it was possible to have one, I would have one. The Silverwing, as far as I could determine, was a chain drive. If I'm not correct about that, I'm happy to be corrected by someone in the feedback. I know that the Forza is a chain drive, and I generally try to shy away from the chain drives. I think the shaft drive and then the belt drive are the best two options. With my Kawasaki, it's a belt drive and it had 98,000 on. The belt is still going fine. Whereas everyone who has a chain knows you've got to maintain them, you've got to oil them and clean them and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of dismissed them for that reason. As I say, I don't have any particular prejudice against them or any particular reason not to have one. I just things that I wanted that didn't seem to have, that I thought, when comparing it to the Bergman, I thought if I can't get another Bergman, I want these features. And if they don't have those features, I'm going to try not to settle for second best. Now, I mentioned the maxi scooters and said that maxi scooters were anything from 200 to 850. Aprilia is an Italian manufacturer. I get a feeling, just based on a feeling, a hunch rather than any actual fact, that there is only one factory or there's only one company in Italy that makes scooters. Italians are famous for making little scooters like Vespas and Lambrettas, but they also make Aprilia, they also make Piaggio and Galera and several other brands of scooters. And originally they just used to make the little 50s or 125s and so on. And then at some stage they branched out into the maxi scooters, and this is one, the Aprilia, as far as I can see, is the largest of the maxi scooters. They were only available in Australia for a short time, and not very many of them seem to have been sold, and perhaps that's why they were only available for a short time. All the reviews I read about these bikes said they were very good, very reliable, powerful, sporty, all those sort of things. But they emphasise the word sporty a lot in them. And if you look at the design of this one, comparing it to the Bergman, say, it does have more sports bike looking lines, and that little screen, which just helps to sort of guide the wind over the rider's head. But the passenger is behind that and up higher, so it's mostly going to hit the passenger in the face and give them lots of buffeting and make their ride uncomfortable. So I kind of put those to one side, saying, well, I'm aware that they're there. I'm aware that there are some shortcomings. The under-seat storage was also an issue with those bikes, in that they said you couldn't fit a full face helmet on. You could fit an open face one, but not a full face one. Even with the top box, you can generally only fit one helmet in, unless you get a double size one. So the Aprilia went in the no thank you column. I think the problem with maxi scooters in Australia was that they sort of have an image as being, scooters are those things that you see people, food delivery people and the post people, the people who deliver your mail riding, and so they have a bit of an image about them that means that they're not popular, and people tend to think, well, if I'm going to buy a little bike, a little scooter just to zip down to the shops with, or zip from home to the station, I'll get a scooter. But if I'm going to get a big bike like a 650, 500, 650, 850, I may as well get a bike, because you pay about the same price, perhaps a bit small. You pay the same registration, insurance and all that sort of stuff, and I'll have a bike because that's more, I don't know how to describe what it is I'm trying to say here. I can't think of the words, but it just seems to be that scooters didn't have quite the image in Australia that they do in Europe, so maxi scooters didn't sell very well. So having dismissed all of these bikes, I was now at a crossroads and deciding what to do next. So with all the two-wheel bikes now, or two types of two-wheel bikes, the sports bikes, the road bikes, the cruisers, the scooters, all in the I don't want that one because it doesn't have this, that or the other that I wanted feature, I was now to the level of, well, if I can't have two wheels, what about three wheels? And that brings in some other interesting questions about whether you have two wheels on the front or two wheels on the back. Now you can see this is a Harley Trike and it has two wheels on the back, and obviously that influences the way you ride the bike. Clearly it's not going to lean in the way that a traditional bike does, and the engine is low down and underneath the tank, but I guess there are other things that make the back wheels go, the diff or however it is that they get these things to go, that are underneath the pillion. And you can see with this one, the pillion is above the rider, and there is no back support for the pillion passenger, and although the trunk or the boot or whatever you want to call it would be quite deep and therefore had plenty of storage, it just didn't seem to be what I wanted, bearing in mind that these Harley Trikes go up for something around 50k. I've actually seen some of them that have been customised that are in the 70k price range, so that was clearly not the kind of bike that I was going to get next. So then there are these other trikes. The Bond Trike is a brand, and there's a Ray Wecco, I think, which is made in Germany, and there are a couple of Australian brands as well. And the noticeable feature of those is that they have obviously one wheel at the front, two wheels at the back. They usually use a car engine and a car transmission, and mostly they're manual, but I have seen them in automatic version. If you look at this one, you can see it has an enormous wheelbase. It's quite long. The rider is quite low down, but the passengers are up fairly high. I haven't ever actually ridden one or driven one, but I've ridden in one. I took one for a tourist ride once when I was in Victor Harbour, and my wife and myself and our granddaughter were in the passenger seat, so they all had seat belts, so we were secure that way. We're quite high up and a little bit exposed to the elements. But the biggest concern I have with these bikes is that, and I don't mean to disparage the people who ride them. This is just what I think about them. I've seen this happen, seen some footage on YouTube and places like that of this happening to them. Because all the weight of the bike is at the back, the engine and the transmission and the radiator and all that stuff is and the petrol tank are all at the back and underneath the pillion riders, the front of the bike is quite light. And in the wrong sorts of weather conditions, when it's windy and the blowing directly onto the bike and person's riding at high speed. I have seen cases where the front wheel has lifted off the road. Now, it might only be for a short period of time, but you can imagine that would be very disconcerting. And I didn't want to be in a situation where that ever happened to me. So the giant long wheelbase Bond trikes, which I'm sure are very wonderful bikes, and the people who ride them always ride them and safely and so on, there just didn't seem to be the bike for me. But there were still options of trikes to consider. So now we're looking at trikes with two wheels at the front. This is a Yamaha Tricity, and it is a 125. So aside from the fact that it has two wheels on the front, being as a 125, it's very good for zipping around town or the commute from the home to the railway station or down the shop to get some milk and bread. But as far as two people riding it, it almost is impractical, so I just dismissed it. But the two wheels on the front is an interesting feature which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next couple of slides. This is the Yamaha Tricity 300. You can see it's very similar to the one I just looked at, and I was intrigued by this because the 300 seemed to indicate to me that it would be a 300cc engine, but it turns out it's a 155, which is only slightly bigger than the previous one and clearly no good for two people riding it. But again, it has two wheels on the front, and as I say, I will explain that in a bit more detail when I show you the next slide then. Now this bike here is the Italian maker Piaggio, and as I said before, I think there is only one actual maker of scooters in Italy, and they make all different sort of brands, and Piaggio is one of their brands. This is the MP3400. I don't know what the MP stands for, but the 3 stands for the 3 wheels, and the 400 is the engine size. Now the noticeable features you can see of this bike, and I have actually owned one of these for a period of time, is that they have 2 wheels on the front and 1 at the back. They're belt driven. They have a CVT transmission or CV transmission, like all scooters do, so it's a twist and go. The 2 wheels on the front has 2 advantages to it. Number 1, it gives you 2 contact patches. Therefore, you've got more rubber on the road. You've got more stability. Secondly, when the bike is at low speed, that is at 5 kilometers or lower speed, you are able to lock the front suspension so that the bike will not lean. And that's handy so that when you come to a roundabout or traffic lights or a giveaway sign and you've got to stop the bike and you're worried about balancing it, if you just lock this transmission and lock this suspension, the bike will stay upright by itself because of the 3 wheels. Now the important thing to do there is to make sure the bike is perfectly perpendicular to the road, because any lean, when you twist the throttle to go again, the suspension lock is released and the bike will just go, and if it's got a slight lean, it'll continue along that lean, and it might be disconcerting, and it might even, at the worst case scenario, which is almost impossible, but the worst case scenario, it might tip over on you. Now in every other respect, these 3-wheel scooters, they're both the Yamahas and the Piaggio and the Galera, which I'll show you next, they work exactly like a motorcycle. They lean, they tilt, they counter steer. Each wheel has its fork, and each fork works independently of the other one. There are disc brakes on both front wheels. With this model of the Piaggio, the brakes are operated by levers on the front, on the handlebars, but I see that on later versions they've dispensed with that, and they now just have one brake pedal on the right hand side, and they've also fitted them with a reverse, making them a little bit easier to try and manoeuvre in and out of a parking space. I mean, think about why you might need a reverse gear on any sort of motorcycle. It's my Kawasaki, which I showed you in the first picture. It weighs nearly 400 kilos. In the town where I live, you have nose-in angle parking to the curb, and it's okay. Your bike will roll into the parking spot with the camber of the road, but there's no way you can duck walk a 400 kilo bike out of a space like that. So you then risk turning it reverse angle parking into the space, and maybe getting fined for failing to park properly. I've never had that situation, but I don't usually park my bike in the main street. But even with my Suzuki scooter, in certain situations it's a bit hard to manoeuvre, so a reverse gear would be handy. So this Piaggio has a reverse gear. This is the Galera Piaggio MP3 500, so same thing, 3 wheels, 2 on the front. Almost the same bike, a little bit more industrial in the design of it, and it's a 500 engine, and I figured if I was going to get either of them I would get the 500 because it was a little bit bigger. I said earlier I had owned the 400 for a while. We bought that for my wife with the idea that she'd get the bug. She never did, and it was sold, but I bought it from a place in Sydney and drove it home to Goulburn, which is about 2 hours, and it went down the Hume motorway dual carriageway at 110 without any concerns at all. And I occasionally rode it back and forth from Queanbeyan where I worked, and it handled those conditions fine. So it had plenty of power. I just thought a 500 would be slightly bigger if I was going to take two people on the bike. The problem being that they're Italian, which is not necessarily an issue, it's just there's not very many of them sold in Australia, and I don't think they're available anymore. So again, parts and supplies and servicing and all that sort of stuff is an issue. So I considered those, but then dismissed them as well. So that brought me to CanAm products. Now, CanAm is a division of a larger company called BRP, which stands for Bombardier Recreational Products. They're a Canadian company. They make jet skis, sea-doos, skidoos, snowmobiles, and they make these trikes, I guess is the best. They make the Ryker, which as you can see in this picture here, and the Ryker comes in three versions, the 600, the 900 and the 900 Sport, and then they make another bunch of bikes which I'll show you the slides for in a moment, called the Spiders. Now the 600 and the 900 are mainly one-up riding, and speaking to a couple of people about them, they seem to be aimed more at the commuter market than they do at the touring market, although I'm sure a 600 would be fine, or a 900 for solo riding, but two up they might struggle a little bit. The unique feature of these bikes, as you can see, is they have two wheels on the front and one at the back, so they're referred to by some people as a reverse trike. I don't want to get into the argument about whether it's a bike or a trike or a motorcycle or a car or whatever it is. It's a three-wheeled machine. You need a motorcycle license to ride it, and you must wear a helmet to ride it. And even though they're almost impossible to tip over, you must take them stay upright course before you can get a permit and before you can ride one. I dismissed the Rikers because they're only relatively new to the market, and the second-hand ones seem to be awfully expensive and beyond the budget that I was prepared to spend on them. So that leads me to the next bike. Now the CanAm range of bikes that I'm talking about now are called Spiders. Notice the spelling there. I'm not sure why that's the case, but it is. When they first came on the Australian market, they were 1000cc 5-speed, and that's what the SM5 stands for. They were 5-speed manual, although there was an RT model, which I think stands for Road Touring Model, which had a what's referred to as a dual clutch or flappy paddle transmission that you change up with your thumb and down with your index finger. But if you closed off the throttle, the bike in the semi-automatic version, the bike would change down and match the revs, the engine revs to the gear you're in automatically. But so the advantage of these bikes is they have two wheels on the front. The width of the wheels at the front is much wider than the Piaggio or the Galera, almost as wide as a small hatch, in fact. Each wheel has its own independent spring and shock absorber suspension, and they are belt driven. They come in a sports model like this, and then they come in the road touring model, which is the next one I'll refer to. So this, as you can see, is the CanAm Spider RT, which I think stands for Road Transport. SC, I don't know what that means, maybe special equipment or something. 6, which means it's the 6-speed box. As I said, when they first came onto the Australian market, they were 1000cc engine, twin, and now they are a 1330 triple. As I said, two wheels on the front, one at the back, belt driven. When they upgraded the engines all to the 1300, I think they took away the manual option, and they all have the dual clutch or flappy paddle transmission. The Spiders are made by a Canadian company, and the Canadians, I gather from from looking at these bikes, are unfailingly polite and concerned about safety, and so they have an alphabet of acronyms to keep these bikes safe. They have ABS, they have stability control, they have traction control, and a whole bunch of other things that I don't even know what they are or what they do, and they're all computerized and they all operate in the background, and providing you ride the bike sensibly, it'll just go down the highway and do what you want it to do. Obviously, because they are as wide as they are and the way they're designed, they don't lean and they don't tilt, they don't do anything like an ordinary two-wheel motorcycle. So you need to unlearn everything you've learned and learn a new way to ride. Most importantly, from what I can determine, is that you lean into the curve when you're turning, you use your outer arm to push the bars in the direction you want to go, and your inner arm to pull gently. You're very gentle on the throttle. But one of the things, they have overall a suite of things that the riders refer to as the nanny. And so when you're approaching a curve in the road or a bend or something like that, if you're approaching it too fast or in a way that the bike senses is unsafe, the computer manages the power to the wheels, so that it reduces the power to one wheel or the other, so that you will maintain a perfect line or a good line and get through the bend or curve without any problems. Now, I haven't actually bought this bike yet, and I'm certainly looking around and looking at a couple that I've seen that I'm very interested in. They fit within my budget. In terms of safety, as I said, I have this acronym of things that do all sorts of things. For passenger comfort, they have, among other things, a backrest. They have heated hand grips, footboards. They're very, very comfortable. In fact, more comfortable, I think, than the pillion seat on my Voyager, and also very comfortable for the rider. They have an electrically adjustable screen for the rider. They have a built-in audio system. So they seem to tick all the boxes and have all the bells and whistles I wanted. And if I want my wife, or if my wife wants to go on the back, I feel that she will feel very safe and comfortable on it. And I hope that if I get around to purchasing one in the not too distant future, that I will be able to make some videos, and you'll not only be able to see the bike, you'll actually be able to see it or have the experience of following me on the road while I'm riding it. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me talking and explaining my thinking about buying a new bike, and I hope that you'll provide feedback and come back and watch some more videos once I have the new bike.